The slap was not loud. The silence after it was. For 8 years, Pearl Jefferson had been the live-in head maid at the Choi family mansion in the Hudson Valley. Black, 28, the only non-Korean staff in the matriarch's East Wing. She poured the soju. She polished the silver. She picked up what the matriarch dropped. She sent half her wages south to a grandfather in Macon, Georgia, who needed a heart he could not afford. Then Hyungwoo Choi came home. The heir. The koi tattoo at the side of his neck. 3 years of forced exile in Seoul behind him. He came back 9 months ago and saw a bruise on Pearl's wrist that nobody else in the house had ever bothered to see. That was the first night. Tonight, 8 months later, the matriarch has called the family to dinner. There is a Korean heiress in ivory silk at her son's right hand. There is a folded cardiology bill in Pearl's pocket. There is a clinic letter Pearl has not told him about. And there is a jade ring on the matriarch's hand that has just struck Pearl's cheekbone in front of 7 witnesses and a bodyguard against the wall. 8 months of silence. 2 drops of blood on a white apron. And Pearl's right hand has stopped waiting. But what was inside the heir's jacket pocket? What he laid on the tablecloth before he raised his glass? That is the part of the night nobody was prepared for. Before starting the story, comment down below where you were watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a member and help our channel. Pearl polished the 3rd silver bowl and set it on the linen with the others. Outside, the Hudson Valley afternoon was the color of old tin. The cardiology bill in her uniform pocket had a red stamp on the front. She had folded it twice already that day. She folded it again now, smaller, and pushed it deeper. The pantry doors swung open. Mrs. Han, the cook, stepped through with a tray of crystal glasses Pearl had already cleaned and stacked an hour earlier. Mrs. Han walked past Pearl, set the tray on the marble counter, and let her elbow knock it back off. The tray hit the tile. 3 glasses shattered. 2 cracked. 1 survived. Mrs. Han did not look at her. "Clean it before Mrs. Choi sees," she said in English with the flat accent she used only when she wanted Pearl to understand. Then she walked back out. Pearl knelt. The shards were small and clean. She picked them up one at a time. A piece slipped past her thumb and opened a thin line on the inside of her wrist. She watched the blood bead. She did not feel it. Her phone buzzed against her hip. 2 short pulses, then a 3rd. She read the screen with the hand that wasn't bleeding. "Don't be afraid tonight." 3 words. No name on the contact. The name was a number she had memorized 8 months ago and never written down. She read the message twice, then locked the screen. She did not know what he meant. She knew he meant something specific. She finished cleaning the floor and washed the cut at the staff sink. The bandage went under the cuff of her sleeve, where Mrs. Choi would not see it. She pressed her palm against her stomach, very lightly, the way she had been pressing it for 3 days, 6 weeks. The doctor in Poughkeepsie had said the words out loud and then waited for Pearl to react. Pearl had thanked her, paid the cash copay, and driven back along the river road with the radio off. She had not told anyone. She had not told the man she would have to tell. She lifted the silver tray. 8 bowls now. 8 place settings tonight. The dining hall on the south side of the house was lit before the sun went down. Mrs. Choi liked it that way. The chandeliers warm, the windows still pale, so the room would look like an oil painting from the doorway. The long table was set with the 80-year-old porcelain. The chair at the head was hers. The chair at her right hand was empty. The chair at the right of the empty chair was set for someone Pearl did not know. Pearl placed the 8th bowl. She moved to the sideboard for the soju decanters. From the corner of her vision, she watched Mrs. Minso arrange a place card in front of the unfamiliar setting. and adjust it with 2 fingers, twice, until it sat exactly straight. The card said Yun Eugene. Pearl did not look at it again. The family began to enter at 6:55. Aunt Min saw first, an emerald green, gold rings on every finger but the wedding one. Then a cousin Pearl had served before, a young man who never met her eyes. Then 2 older men in dark suits whose names she had memorized but never spoken aloud. Then Mrs. Choi. Mrs. Choi entered slowly. She always entered slowly. Wine-red silk over black, pearl drop earrings. The jade ring on her right hand caught the light from the chandelier and threw a small green spot onto the white tablecloth. She did not look at Pearl. She had not looked at Pearl in 7 months. Hyunwoo entered last. Black suit, white shirt, top button undone. The koi tattoo along the side of his neck showed a thin line of red ink at the eye of the fish. He came in beside a woman. The woman was Pearl's age. Ivory dress, glossy black hair pulled back into a ponytail so smooth it looked wet. She walked half a step behind him and did not take his arm. He did not look at Pearl either. He sat down at his mother's right hand, in the chair that had been waiting. The woman sat to his right. Pearl stepped forward with the first soju decanter and began to pour, starting from Mrs. Choi. The pour was clean. Her hand did not shake. She had practiced not shaking for a long time. "Tonight," Mrs. Choi said, in English chosen with care, "we are celebrating something my husband would have lived to see if God had been kinder." The table fell quiet at the rhythm she set. "My son," she said, "and the daughter of the Yoon family will be married in 90 days. Aunt Min-so lifted her glass without being told. The 2 older men inclined their heads. The young cousin, who never met Pearl's eyes, raised his glass and looked, for the first time that evening, directly at Pearl. Pearl did not flinch. She poured into Hyunwoo's glass. Her hand was steady. The koi tattoo at his neck was very close to her wrist. He did not raise his eyes. She poured into Eugene glass next. Eugene said thank you in a voice so soft only Pearl heard it. Pearl moved to the next setting. Mrs. Choi was watching her. Pearl knew this without looking. She finished the pour, returned the decanter to the sideboard, and lifted the second one for the older men's end of the table. As she passed behind Mrs. Choi's chair, she heard her say something in Korean. 3 words. Low. And Aunt Min-seol laugh. Sharp and high. The laugh that meant a translation was coming. It came as Pearl reached the far end of the table. "My sister says," Aunt Min-seol announced in English, "that some hands at this table know how to pour, and some hands only know how to clean." The young cousin laughed. The older men did not. Eugene Yoon set her glass down without drinking. Hyunwoo moved his chopsticks half an inch and stopped. Pearl finished the second pour. She returned to the sideboard. She did not look up. In her pocket, the bill stayed folded. Against her ribs, her phone stayed locked. Inside her, the thing that was 6 weeks old made no sound at all. She lifted the lid off the soup tureen. Steam rose. She began the ladle. The first bowl went to Mrs. Choi. The second to Hyunwoo. The third to Eugene. The fourth to Aunt Min-seol. By the 8th bowl, Pearl had stopped hearing the voices at the table. She heard only the small, wet sound of the ladle and the click of porcelain. When the soup was served, she stepped back to the wall. Mrs. Choi was looking at her again. This time, Pearl looked back. 1 second. Long enough to be insolent. Short enough to be deniable. Mrs. Choi smiled with the lower half of her face. She lifted her glass and turned it slightly, watching the soju catch the chandelier. "Eugene," she said, in English now, the kind voice. Tell us about your father's new building in Fort Lee. He has been quiet about it for too long. Yujin began to speak. Pearl, against the wall, finally allowed herself to let her shoulders drop 1/4 of an inch. The breath she had been holding came out through her nose. She glanced, a single short glance, at Hyunwoo. He was looking at the wineglass in front of him, not at his mother, not at his bride-to-be. He was looking at the glass, and the koi at his neck moved with the small swallow of his throat. His phone, face down on the white tablecloth beside his bread plate, lit up once and went dark. Pearl's pocket vibrated against her hip a half-second later. She did not lift the phone. She knew what it would say. She looked instead at the back of Mrs. Choi's head, the black bob, perfectly cut, the single jade pin at the crown, the wine-red silk falling smoothly across her shoulders. The matriarch was still smiling at Yujin. The matriarch had not stopped smiling since the announcement. Pearl thought, she has known for weeks. The thought arrived without volume. It arrived the way a date arrives on a calendar you have been avoiding. She had known the matriarch was watching her. She had felt it for weeks. She had assumed it was suspicion. She understood now that it had been confirmation. The dinner had not been called for an engagement. The dinner had been called for her. Mrs. Han came through the side door with the second course balanced on her shoulder. Pearl moved to receive the platter. Her face did not change. Her hands did not shake. She set the platter on the sideboard. Mrs. Choi turned in her chair and signaled her. Pearl. It was the first time the matriarch had used her name in 7 months. The matriarch made the name sound like a porcelain word. Fragile, decorative, foreign. Be a good girl. Refresh my glass. Pearl walked to the head of the table with the soju decanter. She did not feel afraid. She had stopped feeling afraid sometime between the broken glass on the pantry floor and the thought just now. What she felt instead was a quiet that was new. The quiet of a room you have just realized is locked from the outside. She lifted the decanter. She poured. The pour was clean. Mrs. Choi watched the soju rise in the glass and did not lift her eyes to Pearl's face. She let her smile soften, the way a doctor's smile softens before a needle. There, she said. That is what those hands are for. She turned back to Eugene. Pearl set the decanter down on the white tablecloth, very softly, beside the matriarch's right hand. She straightened. She did not return to the wall. She walked the length of the table, past Hyunwoo, past Eugene, past Aunt Min-seo, and stopped at the sideboard. She placed her left hand flat on the marble. She felt the cold of the stone come up through her palm and stop at her wrist where the small bandage was. Outside, the sun had finished going down. The chandeliers were the only light now. The wine red of the matriarch's blouse looked the color of something fresh. Pearl breathed in once. The next course was waiting on the platter behind her. She turned, lifted the platter, and walked back toward the head of the table. She set the second platter on the sideboard beside the head of the table. Beef short ribs in soy and pear. The smell rose. Mrs. Choi did not turn her head. Yujin was finishing a sentence about a foundation in Fort Lee. Hyunwoo was still looking at his glass. Pearl began to plate. The serving fork moved between her fingers in the same rhythm she had practiced for 8 years. Bone, meat, sauce. Bone, meat, sauce. She set the first plate in front of the matriarch. Mrs. Choi did not say thank you. Mrs. Choi never said thank you to her. Pearl plated the second and set it in front of Hyunwoo. His hand was on the table. The platinum band on his pinky, his father's wedding ring, caught the light. She had touched that ring before, at a different table in a different room. He had taken her hand once and put her finger inside it, and they had laughed because her finger was too thin and the ring fell. The first night. It came back to her the way nights come back when you are tired. She had been at the basin in the kitchen, pressing ice from the freezer to her wrist where Aunt Minsaw had grabbed her over a plate of cold dumplings. She had not heard him come in. "Show me your hands." That was all he had said. He had been gone for 3 years. He had walked into his mother's kitchen at midnight in his black overcoat with snow on the shoulders, and he had not even taken the coat off. He had said, "Show me your hands." And she had shown him, because nobody had asked to see them in 7 years. He had looked at the bruise. He had not touched it. He had poured her a glass of water and asked her name. Pearl had said her name. He had said his. That was the first night. She set the second plate down now and stepped back. She moved to plate the third. She did not look at Hyunwoo. She did not need to. Aunt Minsaw said something to the matriarch in Korean. Mrs. Choi answered without turning. The Korean ran between them, quick and low, like water under a door. Eugene sat very still. Eugene understood every word. Pearl plated for Eugene. She set the plate down softly. "Thank you," Eugene said again. In that voice, only Pearl heard. Pearl moved to the next setting. Behind her, Mrs. Choi switched to English. "Eugene, my dear, pass me the rice." The bowl moved hand to hand down the table. Pearl plated the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th. She returned the empty platter to the sideboard. The East Wing library was on the 2nd floor. She thought of it now, against her will, because the platter was empty and she had a half-minute before the matriarch would call her back. 3rd shelf. 5th book from the left. Selected poems of Kim Sewol, 1925. English-Korean facing pages. He had bought the book in Seoul and brought it back with him. He had folded the first note and slid it inside the back cover 3 weeks after the first night. The note had said, "Are you safe?" She had folded her own note and placed it inside the front cover the next morning. Yes. There had been 41 notes after that. She had counted. The leather pouch under her mattress was the size of a deck of cards, soft from her hands. Every note inside it. He had asked her 3 times to leave with him. The first time he had said, "Atlanta. We can be in Atlanta tomorrow morning." She had said, "My grandfather can't fly." The second time he had said, "Macon then. We can move there." She had said, "Your mother would find me in Macon." The third time he had not named a city. He had said, "Anywhere you want." She had said, "I can't ask you to give up your name for me." He had been quiet a long time. Then he had said, "Then I will keep my name and find you a way." That had been 6 weeks ago. Pearl came back from the library inside her head. The platter was empty in her hands. The dining hall was warm and full of voices. Aunt Minsaw was laughing at something the matriarch had said. The cousin who never met her eyes was laughing too. Late, the way men laugh at jokes they did not understand but know they are supposed to find funny. Mrs. Choi turned slightly in her chair. "Pearl," she said again, in that porcelain voice. "Come." Pearl set the platter down and walked the length of the table. She stopped at the matriarch's right shoulder. "Yes, ma'am." "My handkerchief," Mrs. Choi said. "I have dropped it." Pearl looked at the floor. The white silk handkerchief lay folded against the leg of the matriarch's chair. It had not fallen there. It had been placed. Pearl felt the shape of the moment before she stepped into it. She bent down. Her right knee touched the rug. Her hand reached for the silk. Above her, she heard the matriarch shift in her chair. A small sound, fabric moving against fabric, the soft creak of leather against the seat. The jade ring came down. It came down the way a hammer comes down. Not fast, not wild. Practiced. The matriarch was sitting up at the same instant Pearl was standing, and the heavy stone struck Pearl's left cheekbone in a single arc that looked, from across the table, like an accident. The sound was small, a single, dull tap. Pearl's head turned a quarter-inch from the impact. She stayed bent for one more second. Then she straightened. She held the handkerchief in her right hand. She did not put her left hand to her face. She placed the handkerchief on the white tablecloth beside the matriarch's plate, very softly, the way you would place a fallen bird. A drop of blood landed on her white apron. Then another. Aunt Minsaw laughed. It was the same laugh as before. High, sharp. The kind of laugh that hangs above a table after a knife has been put down. Yu Jin-yoon did not look up. Her hand had stopped halfway to her glass, and now it lowered, slowly, to her lap. The cousin who never met Pearl's eyes now, and looked away again. Fast. The two older men were silent. Hyunwoo's right hand was around the stem of his wine glass. The stem cracked. The sound was small, smaller than the slap of the ring, but Pearl heard it. A thin red line slid down between his fingers. He did not move his hand. He did not lift the glass. He did not take his eyes from his mother's face. Mrs. Choi smiled, the lower half of her face only. "My apologies," she said in her clean English. "These rugs catch on everything. Pearl, be a good girl and bring more wine." Pearl did not move. She stood at the matriarch's shoulder with the blood drying on her apron in two small dark spots, and she did not move. The dining hall was very quiet now. Yu Jin-yoon, in her ivory silk, lifted her eyes for the first time that evening. She looked across the table at Aunt Minsaw. Then she looked at the matriarch. Then she looked at Pearl. Yu Jin-yoon understood. Pearl could see it happen on her face. The slow arrival of a knowledge she had not been brought to this dinner to receive. The realization that the engagement announcement had not been an announcement. The realization that her presence here was not a beginning, but a stage. Yu Jin-yoon looked down at her plate. She did not speak. She did not stand. But her hands, very slowly, moved to her napkin. She folded it once. Then again. Aunt Minsaw, sensing the shift, lifted her glass and said something in Korean to her sister with a brightness that was meant to fill the silence. The matriarch did not answer her. Mrs. Choi was looking at Pearl. Pearl was looking back. The matriarch's smile cooled by a single degree. "Pearl," she said again, softer now. "Did you not hear me?" Pearl heard her. In her pocket, the cardiology bill lay folded against her hip. Against her wrist, the bandage from the broken glass. Above her cheekbone, the cut from the jade ring. Inside her, the 6-week silence. On the table behind the matriarch, a folded silk handkerchief that the matriarch had dropped on purpose. In her phone, 3 words. "Don't be afraid tonight." Pearl thought of the leather pouch under her mattress. 41 notes. The 5th book on the 3rd shelf. The note from this morning. "Are you safe today?" And her answer, "Yes." The note had been a lie. She had known it was a lie when she folded it. She thought of her grandfather in Macon, sitting at the kitchen table in the faded blue button-down shirt, breathing through the nasal cannula she had bought him with last month's check. She thought of this second line on the test. Her right hand was empty now. Her right hand had been empty all evening. Mrs. Choi was waiting for her to bow her head and walk to the sideboard. The matriarch was certain. The kind of certain that came from 60 years of being the only voice in any room, that the night would proceed. Pearl looked down at her. The wine-red silk, the pearl drop earrings, the jade ring still on the right hand, the stone faintly stained with the blood from Pearl's cheek. She did not feel afraid. She felt, instead, the thing she had been waiting 8 months to feel and had not let herself name. She felt finished. Her right hand moved. The slap landed flat across Mrs. Choi's left cheek. It was not loud. It was the sound of an open hand against silk-thin skin, made smaller by the long room and the heavy curtains. Mrs. Choi's head turned a full quarter to the right. The pearl drop earring detached and fell. It struck the edge of the porcelain plate, bounced once, and rolled under the chair. For a long second, the dining hall held its breath the way a room holds the breath of a thrown vase before it lands. Aunt Minsaw's laugh, which had been rising again to fill the silence, broke off in her throat. The sound that came out instead was a small, wet click. The cousin who never met Pearl's eyes opened his mouth. The 2 older men did not move. Eugene Yoon raised her eyes. Mrs. Choi straightened her head slowly. Her hand went to her cheek and stayed there. Her wedding silk had not moved. Her bob was perfectly intact. Only the missing earring told the room what had happened. She looked at Pearl. Pearl looked back. The matriarch's mouth opened to speak. No sound came. She tried again. The sound that came this time was a thin breath. Her throat had closed. It was the first time in her 60 years that the room was waiting for her voice, and her voice was not there. Pearl stood at the matriarch's right shoulder with her right hand still raised, palm open. The cut on her own cheekbone was bleeding freely now. 2 drops on the white apron had become 4. She lowered her hand. She placed it, very carefully, against the side of her own thigh. Taejun the bodyguard, against the wall behind the matriarch, took a single step forward. His shoes made a soft sound on the rug. He stopped. He looked at Mrs. Choi. He waited for her command. Mrs. Choi's hand was still pressed to her cheek. She tried to speak. Nothing came. She closed her mouth. Her eyes, small, dark, narrow, moved from Pearl to her son. Hyunwoo had not moved. The cracked wine glass was still in his right hand. The thin line of blood from his cut palm had reached the cuff of his white shirt. It stained the cuff a darker shade of red than the wine. Taejun looked at Hyunwoo. He waited. He had served the Chae family for 16 years. He had served the patriarch first. He had served the matriarch after the patriarch died. He knew, the way men in his work know, that the next person who spoke would be the person who held the room. Pearl, in those long seconds, did not feel the cut on her face. She felt instead a quiet that sat directly behind her sternum. It was the same quiet that had arrived earlier, the locked room quiet. But it had grown. It was now the size of the dining hall. It was now the size of the house. Inside the quiet, she saw, very fast, the things she had just lost. She saw her grandfather at the kitchen table, in the faded blue button-down shirt, the cardiology bill in her pocket, the next bill that would arrive next month, that she could no longer pay. She saw the small leather pouch under her mattress, the 41 notes, the note she would never write back. She saw the second line on the test. She saw the child the second line would become. A child who would grow up without a name from this house, without protection, without anything but a mother who had killed her own future on the night the mother had needed it most. She saw, with a clarity that did not feel like fear, the room she was about to be removed from, the car she was about to be put into, the road she was about to be driven down, the kind of road that did not return. She did not move. She did not run. She had stopped running a long time ago, somewhere on the drive back from the clinic in Poughkeepsie with the radio off. Taejun shifted his weight. He looked at the matriarch again. The matriarch was still trying to find her voice. He looked at Hyunwoo. Hyunwoo placed the cracked wine glass down on the white tablecloth. He did it slowly, carefully. The base of the glass touched the cloth without sound. He stood. The chair behind him slid back 2 inches. Aunt Minsaw's hand, which had been suspended over her own glass, lowered to her lap. The 2 older men leaned half an inch backward in their seats. The small, unconscious recoil of men who had spent 40 years reading rooms and had just understood the room they were in had changed shape. Yoo Jin-yoon set her napkin down on the table. Hyun-woo did not look at his mother. He looked at Tae-jun. It was a single, long look. No words. The koi tattoo at his throat moved when he swallowed once, and the eye of the fish, the small detail in red ink, caught the chandelier. Tae-jun looked back. 16 years of reading the men he served had trained him to recognize what he was being told. Tae-jun stepped backward. 1 step. Then a second. His back returned to the wall behind Mrs. Choi's chair. Mrs. Choi turned her head sharply. "Tae-jun," she said. Her voice came out at last. It was not the voice she used at this table. It was thinner. Tae-jun did not look at her. He looked at the floor. Mrs. Choi understood, in the way a person understands the cold from a window before they see the window is open, that her bodyguard had just chosen a side, and the side was not hers. Her hand left her cheek. A small bruise was already darkening on the cheekbone. The skin had not broken. The matriarch's blood stayed inside her body. Pearl's blood, by contrast, was still moving down her own face. Hyun-woo began to walk. He walked the long way. Behind his mother, behind Aunt Min-saw, around the foot of the table, behind the cousin who never met Pearl's eyes, behind the 2 older men, around again. The walk took him the full length of the dining hall. Nobody at the table moved during the walk. Nobody breathed loudly. He stopped beside Pearl. He did not touch her. He stood a half step behind her right shoulder, exactly where she had stood when she had served his mother. And he faced his mother. Pearl could feel the heat of him, the wool of his suit jacket, the faint scent of his soap, the ring on his pinky finger that she had touched once at a different table. She did not turn. She did not lift her hand. She looked at the matriarch, and she waited. Mrs. Choi looked at her son, then at Pearl, then at her son again. The smile that had stayed on her lower face since the start of the evening was gone now. Her mouth was a flat line. She tried to make her face hard. The face had worked for 60 years on every audience she had ever owned. The face did not work tonight. Her right hand, the hand with the jade ring, moved slowly toward her glass. It did not reach the glass. It stopped halfway. The hand began to shake. Not visibly, not from across the table. But Pearl, standing beside her son, standing beside her, saw the small tremor at the matriarch's wrist where the silk ended. Aunt Min-saw opened her mouth. "Hyun-woo, what are you?" "Quiet." It was the first word he had spoken at the table. It was English. It was low. It was not loud. Aunt Min-saw's mouth closed. Hyun-woo did not look at her. He kept his eyes on his mother. The room held. Pearl, in the long seconds that followed, allowed herself a single breath. The breath went in through her nose, slow and deep, and came out the same way. Her cheek was bleeding less now. The blood had begun to clot at the small cut. Her apron carried 6 small dark spots. The dining hall was the same dining hall it had been 10 minutes ago. The chandeliers were the same. The porcelain on the table was the same. The wine-red silk on the matriarch's shoulders was the same. The smell of beef short ribs and pear sauce was the same. The only thing that had changed was the direction the room was facing. It was now facing Hyun-woo. It was facing him because he was standing, and because his mother was sitting, and because the bodyguard had stepped back to the wall. Taejun, against the wall, kept his eyes on the floor. He did not look at Mrs. Choi. He did not look at Pearl. He waited. Hyunwoo reached into the inner left pocket of his black suit jacket. His hand moved without hurry. The motion was the motion of a man reaching for a wallet at a counter. Familiar. Unforced. His hand came out holding 2 folded papers. The papers were cream-colored. One was a clinic envelope, sealed once but reopened. The other was a longer document, folded in thirds, the kind of fold lawyers used when they put a document in a jacket pocket so that it would lie flat against the chest. He laid both papers on the white tablecloth in front of his mother. He did it gently. He did not place them. He laid them, the way you lay a hand on a sleeping shoulder. He did not say a word about what they were. He waited. Mrs. Choi looked at the 2 papers. She did not touch them. The dining hall was very, very quiet. Outside, somewhere on the river road, a car passed in the dark. Mrs. Choi looked at the first paper for a long time before she touched it. The clinic envelope sat on the white linen between her plate and her water glass. The flap had been opened once and pressed shut again. The address was a women's clinic in Poughkeepsie. The name on the front was Pearl Jefferson. The matriarch lifted the envelope. Her hand was steadier now. She drew the folded letter out, opened it, and read. She read it twice. Pearl, behind Hyunwoo's right shoulder, watched the matriarch's eyes move across the lines a second time and stop. Mrs. Choi did not look up from the paper. The line of her mouth tightened by a fraction. She set the letter down on the tablecloth. She did not look at Pearl. She did not look at her son. She lifted the second paper. This one was longer. The folds were precise. She opened it across her plate. The chandelier light fell on the document, and Pearl, from where she stood, could see the heading printed in serif type at the top. Choi Family Hospitality Holdings, LLC. Transfer of membership interest. Mrs. Choi read. Her left hand, which had been resting flat on the table beside her water glass, slowly closed around the cloth napkin. She read the second page. She read the signature line at the bottom. The signature on the bottom right was her late husband's. The date beneath it was 6 months before his death. The signature on the bottom left was a notary stamp from a firm in Manhattan that had handled the patriarch's private affairs for 30 years. Mrs. Choi made a small sound. It was not a word. It was the kind of sound a person makes when they have been struck a second time by something they did not see coming the first time. The 2 older men at the table were now looking at each other. They were the patriarch's old colleagues. They had known the patriarch's signature for 40 years. From across the table, they could not read the document, but they could read the matriarch's face. And that was enough. One of them set his chopsticks down. The other folded his napkin. Yoo Jin-yoon stood. She did it slowly. She placed her napkin on the table with both hands. She inclined her head an inch toward Mrs. Choi, then an inch toward Hyunwoo. She did not look at Pearl. Mrs. Choi, she said in clean, soft English. Thank you for the dinner. I am very tired. I will let myself out. Mrs. Choi did not answer. Yoo-jin walked the length of the dining hall and through the side door without hurrying. The door closed behind her with the smallest possible sound. Aunt Min-seo opened her mouth and closed it again. The second time her mouth opened, no sound came out at all. Her gold rings caught the chandelier, and the gold looked, for the first time that evening, like cheap metal. Hyunwoo had not moved during any of it. He stood beside Pearl. The cracked wine glass, Pearl's glass, was on the table directly in front of where he had been sitting, untouched. The cracked rim caught the light. He reached forward. He picked the glass up by the cracked stem. He turned, slowly, until he was facing the long table and the 7 seats and the matriarch at the head, and the cousin who never met Pearl's eyes, and the 2 older men, and his aunt. He raised the glass. The wine inside it caught the chandelier and threw a small red shape onto the white tablecloth. He spoke for the first time since quiet. "This is the woman I love." He paused. "This is the mother of my child." He paused again. "This is the only person at this table who has never lied to me." He drank. He drank slowly, the way a man drinks the last good glass at the end of a long night. He drank until the glass was empty. He set the glass back down on the white tablecloth, very softly, beside the 2 folded papers. The cracked stem held. The dining hall did not move. Taejun, against the wall behind Mrs. Choi, lifted his eyes from the floor for the first time in 2 minutes. He looked at Hyunmoo. He inclined his head a half inch. The bow was small. It was clear. He stepped 1 full pace away from the matriarch's chair. He repositioned himself against the opposite wall, behind Hyunmoo's empty seat. The bodyguard had picked his post. Mrs. Choi did not turn her head to watch him move. She looked at the wineglass on the table, the cracked one. She looked at the 2 folded papers beside it. She looked at her own hands, the one holding the napkin, the one with the jade ring still on the right index finger. A single tear formed at the corner of her left eye. It did not fall. She closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, the tear was gone. This was the only sign she ever gave that she had understood what had happened to her. Pearl, beside Hyunmoo, did not move for a long second. Then she stepped forward. She walked around the matriarch's chair. She bent down beside the leg of the table, where the pearl drop earring had rolled. The earring lay on the rug, half hidden in the pile, the small gold post visible. She picked it up. She straightened. She placed it, very gently, beside Mrs. Choi's plate. Not in front of her, not in her hand, just on the white linen, where she would see it when she looked down. Then Pearl walked to the side door. She did not look back. The blood on her apron had dried into 6 small, dark commas. The cut on her cheek had stopped bleeding. The bandage at her wrist had held. The cardiology bill in her uniform pocket was still folded. She pushed the side door open with her shoulder. She went through. Behind her, Hyunmoo set his cracked glass down for the 2nd time and walked the length of the dining hall and through the same door without speaking. The East Wing library was on the 2nd floor. The hallway was lit by sconces. The carpet absorbed her footsteps. She passed the small portrait of the patriarch in his 50s, a kind face, eyes that had liked her, and she did not look at it. She climbed the stairs. He followed 3 steps behind her. Neither of them spoke. She opened the library door. The room smelled of old paper and lemon oil. The lamps were off. The only light was the moon through the tall window over the river. She walked to the 3rd shelf. She did not need to count. Her hand had counted for her, every day for 8 months. The 5th book from the left. Selected poems of Kim So-wol, English-Korean facing pages, 1925, leather-bound. She drew it out. She opened the front cover. A folded boarding pass was taped to the inside. It was for a private flight. 2 seats. Tomorrow morning, 6:15, Westchester County Airport to Macon downtown. Beneath the boarding pass, a printed itinerary. A private cardiac transport ambulance scheduled to arrive at Walter Jefferson's address in Macon, Georgia, at 5:30 the following afternoon to convey him to a private cardiac facility in White Plains, New York. The facility name was a hospital Pearl had once delivered laundry to. She knew its specialty. She knew its cost. The arrival time at the facility was scheduled for the day after. Pearl held the page in both hands. She read it once. She read it again. Her hand, the right hand that had slapped the matriarch, the hand that had carried the silver tray and poured the soju and bandaged itself in the staff sink and pressed gently against her own stomach for 3 days, began to shake. It shook the way the matriarch's hand had shaken at the table. Pearl stood in the moonlight in the East Wing library with the boarding pass in her hand, and she did not let herself fall. Hyunwoo came up behind her. He did not touch her at first. He waited. She turned slowly. She held the page out to him, as if returning it. He did not take it. He took her wrist instead. He brought her hand back, gently, against her own body. He pressed her palm flat against her stomach. He left his own hand over hers. He spoke. "You should have told me," he said. It was not anger. It was not blame. It was the voice he had used on his first night back from Seoul when he had said, "Show me your hands." She did not speak. She tried to. The words did not come the way the matriarch's words had not come. They were a different kind of stuck. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder. She broke. She broke the way a person breaks when they have not been allowed to break in 8 months. The breaking was quiet. It was a series of small breaths that were not quite sobs, and not quite the absence of sobs. He did not move his hand. He did not speak again. He let her take whatever shape she needed to take against him. Outside, the Hudson River was the color of slate. Inside the dining hall, 2 stories below, the matriarch sat in her wine-red silk in front of 2 folded papers and a wine glass with a cracked stem and a pearl drop earring beside her plate that nobody had asked her to put back on. She did not move. She did not call for Taejun. She did not call for anyone. The chandelier above her threw its light on her hair, and her hair, for the first time in 6 years of widowhood, looked exactly its true color. Black where she had dyed it, and white at the roots where she had not. Pearl, in the library, lifted her face from his shoulder. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, and the small cut opened again, briefly, then sealed. She looked at him. "Tomorrow," she said. He nodded. She placed her hand on her own stomach again, where his hand had been, and she pressed once. The koi at his throat moved when he breathed. He did not say "I love you" to her. He had said the only sentence that mattered downstairs, in front of the people who had needed to hear it. And now there was nothing left to say. He took her hand. They walked to the door of the library together. They left the book open on the shelf with the boarding pass beside it. Some women learn to slap by being slapped. Pearl had been learning her whole life. You know what nobody talks about in these Korean stories? The real reason those women age the way they do. And it's not what you think. You don't just love these Korean stories, you love what they represent. The grace, the skin that glows like glass, the way those women carry themselves at every age, even after 45. And here's the part nobody talks about. That luminous skin isn't genetic, it's a method. And it works even better on melanin-rich, mature skin like ours. That's why I put together something for you. A complete guide called Korean Glass Skin Secrets for Black Queens 45+, built specifically for our skin, our age, our melanin. The full Korean AM and PM routine. The 15-star ingredients that actually fade dark spots on dark skin. A 30-day glass skin calendar that does the thinking for you, plus 3 bonuses. Glass hair for our 4C and 4B texture, the Jimjilbang Korean Home Spa, and 12 botanical teas that build the glow from the inside out. Today, it's only $6.90, less than a cup of coffee. Scan the QR code on your screen right now or tap the first link in the description. It's also pinned in the comments below. Instant PDF access, 7-day money-back guarantee. No questions asked. You came here for the stories, Queen. Leave with the skin that lives them. If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever served people who refused to see you? What kind of love stops the dinner to say your name? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about dignity, motherhood, and awakening, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.